So today, welcome. I'm glad that you were all able to find us. I see some people here who are from our startups. I'm not sure who the rest of you are, but we're really glad to have you. We're going to have John Plaza speaking about contacting customers and customer feedback. After John is done, the UW Entrepreneurial Law Clinic will be here and talk about Patent 101. So we'll be continuing with that topic of IP that we started last week. So John has had more than 20 years of experience in the renewable energy, clean technology, and aviation sector. And he's been launching successful startups from the ground up for a very long time. He's fantastic. He is president and CEO of Imperium Renewables. And he founded and led one of the largest biodiesel producers in the world through the global financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. And during that time, there were extremely low oil prices, as you will recall. But still delivered record revenues of 87 million, and also has, up until this point, Imperium's activities have reduced global CO2 emissions by more than 4 billion pounds. It's pretty amazing. He's going to be talking today, and we're very lucky to have him. Thank you very much, John.
Great. So I'm going to do things sort of the way I like speakers to talk, and that is to have more of an engagement together and more of a group discussion. Some would call it a round table. I don't have any PowerPoints. I tend to get super bored and sleepy, especially after I eat with PowerPoints, so hopefully we can have more engagement with all of you guys. And I really would like to know your experiences, your questions, your concerns, your successes, your failures in engaging with your customers. And I'll give a brief sort of intro on why I'm excited to talk about this and how it's benefited me in the company that I was the founder and CEO of and since sold, and now as a board member in a number of different companies, how I help strategically those companies think about their growth and success. So you heard the bio. I'll add a little bit to that. So when I was a little kid, I decided airplanes were the coolest thing in the entire world, and I spent all of my education learning how to fly airplanes. I went on to fly small airplanes in Alaska, up above the Arctic Circle for a number of years, got a job flying larger airplanes, and it ended up sort of reaching what I thought was my career pinnacle of flying a 747 from Alaska to Tokyo hauling freight, and I flew for Northwest Airlines, and we would haul about 220,000 pounds of cargo in a 747, and prior to having that job, I thought that would be the coolest job on the planet. Once having that job, I realized the consequences of that didn't reflect my personal values, most importantly from an environmental or sustainability standpoint. So this was right around 2000, and it's a 6.5-hour flight from Anchorage to Tokyo, and we would haul things back and forth between Asia and the United States like horses, cars, cherries, blue jeans, things that didn't at the time and today seem like they were worthy of that much energy consumption. And to share sort of a metric that I use to determine that didn't fit my life plan. In that 6.5 hours, we use about 4,200 gallons of gas, which equates to about 42 years of my personal car, driving 10,000 miles a year at the time. So I thought to myself, if I'm going to truly reflect what I care about, or do what I care about and try to change the world, I can't sit there and burn that much fuel. I need to do something different. So for the next 3 years, I looked for opportunities in the sustainability arena, trying to figure out how I could do something that was good for the planet, a good business, a unique opportunity, and met the demands of society without having them have to change a lot. And so in 2003, I discovered biodiesel. Seattle had the highest per capita consumption of biodiesel in the country, and the closest producer was in the Midwest. It was a very small industry. There was a lot of enthusiasm for clean technology, climate change, a little bit different than now, obviously. And so to me, it seemed like a great opportunity, and I sort of did the typical entrepreneurial thing, which is to throw all caution to the wind. I sold my ski boat and my motorcycle and my house and took a giant load out of my 401k, and I wasn't married, so I wasn't having to convince anybody this was a good idea. And I started Imperium Renewables in 2004, and it was a good time to start a company. And there was a very important component of that time, which is what we're going to talk about today, and that's the customer engagement that we had at the time as a small company. So the first facility we built was 5 million gallons a year. That was one of the largest biodiesel facilities in the West Coast. To give you a frame of reference, Washington uses about 1 billion gallons of diesel a year, so 5 million gallons is a drop in the bucket relative to diesel demand, but it was large for the scale and the size of the industry. And with the enthusiasm around climate change and clean energy and clean tech from the investment community, we recognized there was a broader opportunity to grow the business. But to do that, we needed to raise money. And this is the key message that I want to layer into the discussion today on why talking to your customers and getting their feedback is important. Because if you want to build a business, you have to have a customer. But more importantly, you have to have an investor. You have to have money from somebody else. And 99.9% of the businesses that start up, you need somebody else's money. And the only way you're going to get somebody else's money to grow your business is if you have customer engagement. So I'll circle back to that when I'm finished with my story. So 5 million gallon a year facility, we start looking for customers besides the local fueling station that's buying our product, or the oil company that doesn't really want to buy our product because it's in competition to their product. And we landed a opportunity to do some exploratory testing on cruise ships. And that engagement with that customer led to a very significant commercial arrangement, which was a 5-year contract for 20 million gallons a year of biodiesel for 100 million gallons, which was the largest commercial contract at the time for biodiesel in the country. And we couldn't supply it from our existing facility. It wasn't big enough. And we needed that type of customer engagement and customer relationship in a material commercial arrangement that provided, it's commonly in the fueling industry called a take or pay, meaning if you produce the fuel, they will buy it at an agreed upon price. And if they don't produce it, they still have to pay for it. It's a pretty erroneous set of terms, but it's the type of structure that gets everybody excited. And what it did for us is it allowed us to raise $135 million in 3 rounds of investment over 18 months and raise $100 million of debt to then go build a 100 million gallon a year biodiesel facility in Western Washington, which was one of the largest in the world. So that one relationship and that one contract allowed us to basically build our company. Without that relationship, without that customer engagement, without that process of nurturing that relationship, we would have never raised money, never built a company, and I wouldn't be here today. So all of this gets layered into, from my perspective, the need to have this collaborative process with your customer. You need to know what their issues are, what their challenges are, what their concerns are, and what's success for them. What relationship benefit do they get from you? Because in the end, it's all about what you can provide each other, and you need their money, they need your product, and so how do you make that work for both parties? And oftentimes, it just comes down to relationships. It just comes down to the human interaction component that is so important in every aspect of your business as you're starting out. So in summary, customer engagement obviously I think matters second only to investment, but you can't have investment without customer engagement. So what I want to do today is sort of with that concept, get stories from you, experiences from you, questions from you, as you are thinking about your business, as you've engaged with your customers. what are the challenges that you're facing to get engagement? What are the opportunities that you see that your customer doesn't see? Are you having the ability to communicate effectively? Are you in the position where you think you're strong technically, but you need a salesperson? And some of the folks that I've met with here and tried to help them think about funding, some of the startups that I work with, they're often like, I know what I need to make. I don't care what the customer thinks. I don't really want to talk to the customer. I've got this really cool idea, and if I just bring it to market, people will buy it. And in some cases that's true, but in most cases it's not. So you have to have this engagement. So I have a series of stories that I can tell, but I don't really want to stand up here. I'd like engagement and ideas from you guys. So does anybody want to start with a question or an issue or a topic that they'd like feedback, or and please feel free to while staying on track on topic and on track, I'm happy to talk about any of these issues that are front and center. So I tend to be focused on manufacturing materials, product development, that is, in the sustainability and clean tech sector. So I have to approach all of this from that perspective. But one of the most effective ways that I've gotten to reach out to customers, potential customers, is conferences. And trade conferences, there's a million of them on every industry. Some of them are, 400,000 people. So it's hard to network and get connections, but they are the best source of information that you can find and to build relationships. And they're challenging in the sense that you have to network. You have to go to the meet and greets. The first day of the conference, there's also always a social hour. You have to go there and you have to walk up to people and say, hey, what do you do? Let me see your name tag. And it's uncomfortable. Nobody really necessarily likes to do that unless they're in sales, but that's what they're all there for. That's what every single person is there for. If they're at a social event as part of the conference, or if they're at the conference, they expect and hope that people will engage with them. So walk up to people. They all have their name tags on. They all have their companies on. You can look at the list of attendees. Walk up to people and start talking and ask them. So this is the area of field that you're interested in. I have a super unique technology that I'm working on. I'd really like to talk with you now or later, and can we exchange business cards, and can I reach out and build that personal connection right away? And that, in every case that I've ever had, and in the companies that I help, both here and elsewhere, that's one of the most effective ways. There are certainly other ways to do it, and we can talk about those, but to me, that initial connection, if you have a local customer here that potentially would be a great buyer of your product or your technology, you can try banging on their door. But that hasn't worked very well for me, and most of my customers in my previous business were in Houston, so I didn't want to just get on a plane and drive to Houston or fly to Houston. That's the beginning of the conversation. So, the importance of why I think that works is, so there's, a variety of ways. You can pick up the phone and call some stranger. And if you're representing a business, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be really hard to get through to that individual. Lots of people use LinkedIn. I've found it to be not very beneficial in that people just sort of ignore my efforts. You can try email, but without that, from my perspective only, without that personal engagement, it's really hard to get a response from a stranger. Whereas if you build that initial 5 or 10 minute relationship, you've got that memory that they have, and provided that you had a good conversation, and you give them a 2-minute teaser of what you are selling and what you're trying to get from them, you start to build that relationship, which allows you to then reach out to them at a later state and say, hey, can we chat for half an hour and let me understand, what your areas of, how can I help you? Because in the end, that's your sole mission as a company, is how can you help your customer with what you have, and why maybe it's better, why maybe it's a different solution to their problem than they've thought about. But you've got 2 minutes to make the pitch and hook their attention and build that relationship over a 5 to 10 minute period, and then you can follow up and have that more in-depth discussion. And when you have that in-depth discussion, you try to capture that in whatever method works for you, whether writing it down at the time, writing it later, but that capturing that information becomes part of an overall message back to your investors. This is my product. I've reached out to multiple customers. They've told me this is their problems. If you're lucky enough, they'll share with you some of the issues they're having with your potential competitors, pricing information, all of that kind of intellectual capital that is so important as you're building your business to provide the basis of the pitch deck, which you go to investors for. So I do think there's a number of things that I think about when I'm reaching out to anybody, whether it's a cold call or a follow-up. I never send emails on Monday mornings, and I never send emails on Friday afternoons or the weekends. I always try to make sure it gets there ideally somewhere between Tuesday at 11 and Thursday at 1, meaning everybody is swamped from the weekend on Mondays and overloaded with trying to get out the door on Fridays. So optimizing your effort to contact them when you think they're most likely to have the attention is the first thing. I think, if you met somebody at a conference or some sort of social engagement where you had a face-to-face, about a week or less is a good follow-up time. If you go more than 2 weeks, they're probably going to forget or be of the perspective that you don't really care that much, and so you forgot about it. I think communication etiquette is a lost art in today, and this is a little bit of a diatribe on this, but so much engagement that we have today versus 10 years ago or 15 years ago almost when I started my business is all electronic. And there are benefits and negatives from this transition from where we used to have this more direct engagement to how people engage today. And I still fail at it like everybody else, but I think it's really important if you get any email communication from anybody that you may want help from in the future, don't take more than a day or two to get back to them. Be respectful and follow up, because while you may not think you need that person now, you may need that person 2 years from now. And so that polite engagement, especially with your customer base, is really, really important, because in the end, we're all people and we still care about the same things that we used to care about. And the business world is starting to forget that. And I see that a lot in the companies that I'm helping, where the CEO will get an inquiry from a potential customer and they're overwhelmed working 100 hours a week, and they can't get back to that customer, and that customer then has challenges later when the CEO is like, okay, I got to get back to this guy. It's been 6 months and now I want them as a customer. And so they lose that opportunity. So that engagement, especially with your customers, is super important. My first answer is always, I was too stupid to know any better. I think in reality, there's some truth to that. I didn't contemplate how challenging it would be to transition. But I think if you look at things from a more broad perspective, I think it revolves and this is a good segue into one of the topics I want to talk about. It revolves around the passion and enthusiasm of entrepreneurs in the ability to convey their enthusiasm for their business. And this becomes super important for customer feedback and investors and everything else. So I tend to be really passionate about something, and I tend to, at least in my own mind, be relatively effective in communicating my passion to others. And so I was real passionate about aviation, and then lost that, and I discovered biodiesel and the fact that it was 73% better from an emission standpoint than petroleum diesel. It worked with existing vehicles. You could use crops from the US and North America. It displaced economic. There was lots of things for me to get excited about, and I was successful in communicating that to prospective employees, prospective customers, prospective investors, and everybody wanted to see that mission through. And I think this is why people are excited about entrepreneurism, and why people tend to gravitate towards entrepreneurs, and that there's that ability to share your mission, to share your passion, and everybody gets excited about that. So, and I think each experience lends itself to non-industry specific opportunities. So the leadership and mission focus of taking an airplane and flying from Anchorage to Tokyo is very mission and execution focused. It's not like you get halfway there and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. You start from before takeoff, and you think about the whole flight before you take off, and what you're going to do when you land, and what's going to happen if this happens, or an engine quits, or so you think about all these things in advance. And I think those skills lent itself to executing, at least in my case, for my business. So in my mind, it's actually a detriment for society to pigeonhole anybody into a specific industry or a specific technology or a specific role or gender or area of expertise, because we all have inherent skills, we all have inherent interests, and if you can find something that you're excited about and communicate that effectively, then it doesn't matter what your background is. It only matters that you're passionate and excited about something, and that's a natural attraction for all the key things that you need to execute on your business. So it comes down to that. So I got this idea from somebody else, so I won't take credit for it. But what the idea or the concept is for conquering that fear of communicating strangers is, think about how you would feel if somebody reached out to you, and what way would you want them to do it? And would you be bothered or offended if they did? And if you can put, basically it's empathy, if you can put yourself as if you were in their shoes contacting you, then can you use that self-perception on what they're likely to feel? And not everybody's the same, but we generally have the same reactions. And if you get a negative reaction from a polite, direct, succinct outreach, then that's their issue. That's not a personal affront to you, that's their own issue. I will tell you that in my experience, no matter how hard I try, that generally doesn't elicit a lot of response. And I get offended because I see it as a rejection, but I still continue to try to do better. And so that's why I'm always like conferences. One of the things that I do is, if I have to travel for work, I look for opportunities to connect with people in a destination that I'm going, to try to cram more stuff in. And so if I were going to Houston to meet a customer, I would try to find somebody else that I could visit and meet with, and maybe it's a cold call to say, hey, I'm going to be in Houston, or pick your city, and I'd love to take you to lunch. It's always, can I do something for you, so that you'll get them to be willing to, engage with you. But I think you're on the right track for conferences, and I think to a certain extent you're lucky in that the research community is a little more outward appreciating of outreach. I think if you still have a UW email, that uw.edu email is generally seen as non-threatening, whereas if it's from a company, then it's okay, they're trying to sell me something. So leverage that university if you still have that. So is it mapping event, big event types ideas?
At UTech events on campus.
Okay.
Things of that sort.
Well, all I can tell you is holding conferences by conference organizers is a huge business, and they are extremely motivated to implement new cool technologies, and anything that you can do to interface smartphone to conference attendee to be cool, I think is a super interesting space. I think there's lots of obvious people trying to do that. I think you probably don't necessarily need to go to conferences to get the attention of conference organizers, and usually they, at least in the clean tech sector, they're not only clean tech conference organizers. They do pharmaceuticals, biotech. They do all sorts of stuff, and so, I think LinkedIn might be a pretty good solution, and generally, I think the rule of thumb is for every 10 emails, if you get 2 back, it's pretty good. So just accept that's sort of the way the world works, and don't give up. And network. In the end, this is all about the most awkward of things, and that's networking. And nobody really likes to do it. There was one guy in my company of 100 that liked to do it, and he was really good at it, and so he was the VP of Biz Dev and Sales. Everybody else, including me, didn't like it. So. Sure. So I think LinkedIn has a lot of validity and potential in today's world, but it hasn't been that impactful for me. And I have my LinkedIn profile was professionally done. I, read books. I went to conferences. This is supposed to be the world-changing social interface for, the business community. So it hasn't worked very well for me. But I have a friend who is basically the vice president of sales for international sales for a large grocery distribution business, and they have sales channels across the world. I think they do like 35 billion a year in sales, and he's head of the international, and he uses LinkedIn religiously, and it works brilliant for him. I think it's partly because of his title, but I think it's more important that he's the vice president of international sales for this big business. And so there's certainly a culling of, who's sending me emails and who's beneficial to me. I think that happens. But for him, he gets 8 out of 10 people responding, and a lot of times it's just cold emails through LinkedIn to say, hey, I'm going to be, sort of what I mentioned, I'm going to be in Sydney in 2 weeks. I'd love to sit down and tell you what our business does. And people are like, sure. So I think in the right application with the right skill set and the right circumstances, it's a very effective tool. I still haven't mastered it yet. So. That's a really common and natural inflection point where you're trying to break into a new market with a new product, and I appreciate that giving it away for free is not a valid business strategy. And one of the ways, medical device, I can't claim to be an authority on medical devices, so I don't know the space. One of the ways that other companies and my company as well offers a solution is a success-based payment structure. So you provide them the device, and every time they use it and have a successful result, you get an equivalent of a royalty payment. And it's free up front, and you got to pay me when you use it. You've got some challenges on how do you track their use and some of those other things, and so maybe that's not the right approach. But success-based payment is a very attractive way for the customer to have a de-risked strategy to implement your technology or your idea. And it's not necessarily appropriate or acceptable in every way, but thinking about that and how that may be applicable in your space, and to see if others do that, for example, in the medical device space. But how can you prove to them that your device is better than the alternative, and that you still need to make money? And I think roughly 90% of the people that are in business are actually quite honorable and understand that everybody has to make money. So you've got to get past the hurdle of, yes, it's new and I need to make some money. So, other ways to do that are milestone payments, 30% up front, and then after you've used it for 60 days, if you like it, you give me, the rest of the money. And if you don't, then I get it back. That would be another potential way. But you have to build that trust, and often I call that you have to buy their trust, which is frustrating, but you also have to get paid. And most business people understand that. And if you don't push, they're going to take advantage and say, yeah, I'll try it for free, and maybe I'll send you some information. And if you're going to let me do that, then I'm going to keep doing that forever. So you have to, build that relationship and then start to layer that in. But maybe that's a solution. There again, not being in the medical device space, I do know people who work in that space from a sales standpoint, and I don't know how big your team is, I don't know your funding situation, but one of the ways that medical device companies are successful in both selling and implementing their equipment is they have a person there. And that person, is there once a week saying, hey, have you used our equipment? Have you had any problems? Do you have any upcoming, surgery scheduled where I could be there and make sure and show you, that it's a solution? And so that, once again, it's that direct personal engagement. An email, I'm assuming, to a doctor is probably not gonna, they're too busy and got other things. So, ask if you can be present when they do the test so that you can see the results live, and maybe that will be enough for them to be like, oh yeah, I probably should test that, and okay, this guy's bugging me, so maybe I will do it. And so there again, in this is just my perspective, but it's that personal engagement. And the good thing here in your particular field is there's, I think, a readiness and a welcomeness to accept that UW is one of the leading, universities in the medical space, whether it be biotech or medical devices, and there's lots of doctors. So I would think people would be receptive to that, but it requires, either you or somebody from your team sort of constantly pushing and nudging. This is medical device sales, but my friends who do that go with a box of donuts and and they alternate it with a box of bagels. There again, you're bribing people in whatever polite, respectful manner you can to get them to engage with you.
They're a touchy subject nowadays. We won't go into the weeds on that one, but there's software, UI, internet-related businesses, all of those, that entire realm is covered by utility patents. They're awesome because they last 20 years. Design patents, less awesome because they only last 14 years, but they also don't cover functional aspects of the invention. They only cover what does it look like, the novel ornamental design. So Kanye's glasses, that's the design patent. So I mentioned that right to exclude. You can, if you obtain a patent from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, which we're going to call them just the USPTO throughout the rest of the presentation, you have the right to exclude making, making, using, selling, offering to sell, or importing your invention. That's quite the laundry list of things that people can't do with your invention. They practically can't touch it if you have a patent on it. But it's for a limited time. And that's the trade-off you make when you obtain a patent, that you're putting this in the public domain, and the government is rewarding you for putting it in the public domain by saying, okay, you can make money on it exclusively for 20 years by preventing these other people from doing anything with it. But that making money thing is important because the government's not saying that you have the right to practice the invention, because for instance, recently the USPTO grants patents on marijuana plants and products. But the government is not saying you have the right to use those. It's just saying, yeah, that's an invention. So you have the right to exclude others from doing it, but not that you have the right to practice the invention. So you do not, by getting a patent, do not have the right to go grow a bunch of those marijuana plants. I said I wouldn't speak about plant patents, but using it as an easy example. It's not giving you a license to make, use, or sell. That's all on you to do. So why are they valuable? I'm sure if any of you have gone to a VC event, people have asked you about patents. Do you have a patent on your invention? You've probably other inventors have asked you about your patents. So an important aspect of it is it captures your investment. So you spend all of this money and time inventing something, and you need to recoup that cost, either in time or in money. And a patent gives you that monopoly for 20 years on that invention to attempt to recoup that investment. Also, it makes things tangible. So instead of dealing with a trade secret, kind of going into a negotiation and be like, you got to keep this secret. No, instead you're licensing the technology that's in the public domain as a patent and saying, this is the invention, this is exactly what you're getting, and we're going to license it at this rate, we're going to sell it to you at this rate. The right to exclude reduces competition. VCs will love to hear that because they're investing in your company because they think you're new and you're the only one doing this, or at least you're the only one doing it as well as you are. And so if you have a patent, you can keep doing that exclusively. It affects the company's valuation. It goes back to the VCs. When VCs see that there's a patent or a pool of patents, as it's called, they get excited because that means that you've put in the money, you've put in the effort, you have this proprietary technology that no one else can use, and so that they might value at a higher number. Okay, so they sound awesome. Is your invention patentable? And we're going to go over what's patentable and what's not patentable. So remember those categories I talked about earlier with utility patents, articles of manufacture, machines, etc. Well, to be patented, those inventions must also be useful, novel, and non-obvious. So now we have a lot of terms. We have these kind of vague articles of manufacturer, machine, just think mousetrap. And now we have useful, novel, and non-obvious. So don't be Homer Simpson. We can get through this. But then what's not patentable? We have laws and products of nature. So you can't go pluck a weed out of the garden over there and simply go get it patented. You can't get some bacteria off your computer and just take that to the patent office. Similarly, algorithms. The USPTO has a long-standing philosophy or rule that, and it's in the it's the USC 101. The law says you cannot patent algorithms, physical phenomenon, certain business methods, and abstract ideas. And abstract ideas is the software issue I mentioned earlier. It's very big in the patent world right now, following some big Supreme Court cases, that you can't patent most implementations of abstract ideas in software. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we could spend a whole lecture on this. In fact, many patent attorneys have. All I'm going to say is that think of an abstract idea as something that somebody does in an everyday capacity, and the idea of doing that, and then implementing it through software. So say you go look for you want to find a cheap hotel, so you look at the list of prices of the hotel and you pick the cheapest one, right? Well, there might be an application for a patent out there on literally that, like using a website to find a cheap hotel. And it's more complicated than that, but that's the general idea. And the USPTO and the courts have said, no, that's not happening anymore. So we're going to go through a quick example. The kissing shield. This is one of those crazy patents that is actually out there. So is it useful? Well, the USPTO said, yes, it is. It blocks people from kissing you if you hold it up. Is it novel? Well, I'm sure some examiner saw this and was, what am I doing with my life? And they were like, yeah, it's probably new. They went through and they looked through the database of other patents and patent applications and publications out there, and they said, yeah, there's nothing else like it. It's non-obvious. So they went and found riot shields and other shields, and it didn't really have the same elements as this shield. The patent application thoroughly told somebody how they could use and make it, and they described the invention thoroughly enough that the USPTO said, yeah, it's sufficiently described the invention so as somebody who is technologically knowledgeable in kissing shields could make such a thing. So we've got the basic terminology, but before we go diving, you probably all want patents on your inventions. Anyone who invents something and spends that time probably wants a patent or some sort of protection. But before we do, there's things to think about. Your main idea, your main invention might not actually be your only patentable idea, and it may not even be the best patentable idea that you have. So we often recommend to people who come to the clinic to look inward and identify inventions that are valuable to your business. And how you can think about that is if in the process of developing your idea, you've come across these problems, these speed bumps, and you've overcome them. And it was more than just, oh yeah, it's the obvious way of getting around it. That overcoming that speed bump, that obstacle in development, may actually be a patentable invention in itself. And so we recommend that you go through your lab notes and your meeting notes with your engineers. And not only do you make sure that you have adequate descriptions of your inventions, but also look for other ideas. Like, did your engineer, who may work mostly independently, come up with like a really innovative way of solving a problem? That might be a patentable invention. And it may not even be your main idea, but the more patents that you have on your process of obtaining your device slows competition and likely will help with VCs. Ensure the value of the patent exceeds the potential cost. This is something that we run into in the clinic a lot. A lot of people think, oh, I've seen InventHelp ads on TV I think it's George Foreman, or the Foreman Grill guy. And he makes it sound easy to get help with protecting my invention. Patents are expensive. They're really expensive. And if you're just somebody working on your own dime, they might be prohibitively expensive. And we run into this with the clinic a lot. So you need to really assess your books and make sure that you can afford it. And this one we'll get into later with ownership, and we kind of touched on it before. But make sure that everyone in your company that's inventing stuff signs an assignment agreement. And what that does is if you get a patent on their invention, they've assigned it to you. Or if they have a patent and you negotiated with them to buy it from them or pay them some more equity, that they assign it to your company. Because you want to work with the patent as a company, not on an individual basis. And also, this is just the last thing, and we're not going to go delve into litigation because that's something the clinic doesn't do and is not qualified to really recommend. All we want to say is that when you're thinking about getting a patent, remember that the government is not going to come to your aid. They are not going to say, they're just going to say, here's a patent, go forth. It is on you to stop others from using your invention. Now, once you get through the court system, as hopefully it works for you, you will probably prevent somebody from using, making, selling, importing. But that is a long and costly fight. Especially if it's a larger company, they could probably run you into the ground in that fight. And so all we want to say is that you need to make sure that you're capable of seeing what's happening in the world and know if somebody's infringing on your patent and be able to stop them. So general steps for obtaining a patent, the first thing we recommend is either go through us, the clinic, or if you have the money, hire a patent attorney because they're going to be able to turn around something much faster to you than, say, the clinic could. And that patent attorney will help you draft a patent application. You will file that patent application with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And in there, we're not going to go delve into applying for foreign patents, because again, that's not something the clinic does, but we want you to make you aware that when you do that, you should also mention to your patent attorney that you're interested in maybe manufacturing something overseas. In that case, you want to keep in mind the Patent Cooperation Treaty, PCT, and the Paris Convention, and bring that up with your patent attorney. I'm sure they'll bring it up with you, whether you want to file in other countries. But if you wait too long, and this goes back to those public disclosures, it can preclude you from getting foreign protection because they have each patent office in different countries has different rules as to public disclosures. Once you've filed, you're going to fight tooth and nail. You're going to get rejections from the USPTO, most likely. And they're going to say, no, your invention is not novel, or it's obvious to somebody skilled in the art. And so you're going to say, no, it's not. It's new. It's not obvious. And here's why. And then you may get an issued patent. Yay, you have a patent. Or after a long fight, you decide it's not worth it. Maybe your company has moved on. Maybe the technology has moved on. And so you decide to abandon the application. The process, not only does it cost a lot of money, it also takes a while. It's 3 to 5 years. It's like kind of the average. Some go much faster if you pay more money, or you go through, the clinic has makes special things where the examiners look at ours first. So what is a patent? We haven't really talked about what it looks like. So this is kind of the front page, the cover page of a patent application. And so we picked a fun one, and I think we might have gotten this from you. So it's a method of concealing partial baldness. I told you there's some wacky patents out there. And you may know people who are infringing on these patents. So the patent document contains that front page, the kind of the details, but also it has a specification, and it needs a specification. If you don't have a specification, your patent is going to application is going to get sent back to you, and like, you are missing A through Z. you need a written description of the invention and the manner of making it, using it, and you need to be as clear and elaborate as much as you can. They want you to be concise, and that's more of our recommendation to you, that you don't disclose literally everything about your business in your patent application, but you do need to disclose enough to allow somebody to make it or use it, which ends up being a lot. And that's to enable a person skilled in the art, so somebody such as your engineer, make and use the same. And this best mode thing is kind of, we left it in there because it's kind of the old advice, is that you also have to set forth the best way of using it. It can't be used to invalidate your patent. So if you don't have, like maybe you put it in the way you see using it, but that's not the best way of using it, then they won't be able to like throw your patent out for that. But you want to make clear, and how people do this is they often include examples of how to use your invention. So say your process is for making a special type of metal at a certain temperature using certain ingredients. You can literally lay out an example where you say, I use this much of this ingredient, this much of this ingredient, this much of this ingredient at this temperature for this long, and it yielded this result, and that's great, and that's better than the previous ways of doing it. That's kind of the best, that would probably satisfy the best mode requirement in the application. So you also include these things called the claims, and that's what you're claiming. So this is describing your invention. This is claiming the invention. So this is what you're claiming as your patentable subject matter. You also need figures. So this is what kind of the text of a patent application or a patent application looks like. So this is the partial baldness one again. And so you have a brief description. You have a description of the drawings that you included. It's all, if you read this text, and it's way too small for you guys, it seems very lawyered, and that's because it was probably drafted by a patent attorney, and patent attorneys are paid that amount of money that we'll get to later because they know what the patent office is looking for, or hope they know, and so they can craft the language as to being more acceptable to a patent examiner. So this is some of the diagrams from this baldness patent. So basically the method is to have 3 equal sections of hair and then just fold it over the head to make so that it completely covers the bald patch. So they go through all these steps, and you can see like a little dotted line of a hand pulling the hair over. And so this is what we were talking about, claims. These are what claims look like. So you have a method for styling hair to cover bald areas using only the individual's own hair comprising, and then this part is what we call the elements of the claim, and that's really the meat of your claim. And we'll break down an easier one for you guys in a second. Patent examination. So we should talk about this because I've been throwing words at you like USPTO, examiner, prior art. So what happens when your application gets to the USPTO after a long wait? They will assign it to an examiner, and an examiner is a guy with a technical background who sits probably in Alexandria, Virginia. Very nice place. I recommend you visit. And he will go through your application, he'll read it, to first of all make sure that you don't have any initial issues, like maybe you're missing a drawing or you mislabeled some pages. And then he will go through your claims, or she will go through your claims and evaluate based on prior art, whether your invention is novel and not obvious. And that prior art is the ether. It's prior patent applications, it's published patents, it's they can go look at YouTube, they can look around the internet, and I actually worked at the USPTO for a summer, and they recommended that if we looked at an invention and didn't quite know exactly what was going on, we'd Google it, kind of Google search around the idea, and that sometimes turned up better like prior art than our own search in our database did. They mostly stick to their database because they're very good at using it, but you can get a sassy examiner and he can throw all kinds of things at you. But back to the in the weeds, you're gonna probably hear this word when talking to other entrepreneurs, a provisional patent, and that's really getting your foot in the door. So a provisional patent, and without going into too much detail, because I don't want to run us out of time, a provisional patent is the very, you could turn it on a napkin if you wanted. But what it does is it preserves a filing date. That filing date is very important in the US because it would set the clock ticking for that 1 year disclosure we talked about. But all it needs to have is a description of your invention, and it can be as detailed or undetailed as you want it to be. Most patent attorneys will tell you to turn in as close to a finished patent application for your provisional as possible, because what you can do with a provisional application is you can convert it into a full non-provisional application, which is what actually gets prosecuted. Like that's what happens at this USPTO, is they look at non-provisionals. They will never evaluate your provisional. They will never go look for prior art. They will never have formal examination on that provisional. So all you are doing is giving the USPTO a description of your invention at a certain date so that you can keep that date. You want to be the first in, because we're a quote, a first to file system. So the first one to the USPTO wins. So you want to get in as quickly as possible. These are easy. You don't have to be a patent attorney to send them to the USPTO. You just send them in, you pay a nominal fee, and you can get that date. That date only lasts a year. If you don't convert it to a non-provisional within a year, it's gone. You abandon it. You lose that date. So we talked about that. When the examiner sends you rejections, like he says, no, sorry, man, your invention is not new or it's obvious. You can interview them, and you can appeal, and you can also call their supervisor. Based on my knowledge, they don't really like it when you go above them to their supervisor. So this is just a basic timeline, very general. You conceive the invention, this 1 year goes by, you file the provisional, you receive an office action, and you fight them for a while, and then you get your final office action, and if you win, you get a notice of allowance, and then other issues can arise, and you got to pay money. So I've already kind of talked about this. Generally, office actions are a piece of paper that say, we object to your use of this word or your phrasing in your invention, or we reject your claims because they are not new or not novel, they are obvious over XYZ. How you respond, like we said, you argue, you can amend your application, or you can abandon, or you can split up your application into a new application. General timelines, I'll let you guys go back through this if you want more detail. Final office actions are the big scary one. It's usually a final rejection of the application, and if you don't win this, there are avenues to take. You can appeal, or you can get continued examination, but that's really expensive. Usually people will amend, because the examiner, they're not all really stubborn. Some of them really are, but some of them are not, and they want to work with you, especially if you have a really cool idea. And if in this final rejection, you'll probably be able to see kind of what they want from you, and your patent attorney will cleverly amend to make them happy. Okay, we talked about this. So generally, in a patent claim, there's a preamble and there are elements. This preamble is generally not worth a lot. These elements, though, are what you're getting patented. Like, that's what you want. And so we've talked about prior art, we've talked about novelty, we've talked about non-obviousness, and since we're running low on time, we're gonna keep going. So let's say you get the patent through, woohoo! But you also have to pay. You have to pay an issue fee. You have to pay maintenance fees. You will continue paying the USPTO throughout the life of the patent. what do those fees look like? So we have this nice table that you can go back and look through later. Most inventors we deal with fall into these categories. You pay, when you file, you pay 140 or 70 bucks. When they search, they'll charge you 300 or 150. When they examine, they charge you that. The issue fee can be up to almost $1,000. Maintenance fees easily account for $5,000 in a small entity. So it's going to be expensive, and this is all on you. This is all on you to pay as the inventor. What are the other costs? Well, you have patent attorney fees, and those can really vary. We don't have like a ballpark number for you, but generally expect thousands to tens of thousands, depending on the complexity, the size of the firm, whatever you decide to go with. But it can be very expensive to get a patent attorney. And the USPTO fees, like we just laid out, it's very expensive just on you for that. So let's say you got a patent. Do you actually own it? And we kind of talked about this already, but since we're in co-motion, we can't talk about a lot, but we can talk about kind of the agreements that you enter into with your employees, as well as partnerships that you enter into. You need to be very careful about having your employees sign those assignment agreements we talked about earlier, because if they don't, the invention goes to the patent, goes to the inventor, not the company, until they assign it. A company is not an inventor. The people are the inventors. So make sure that you've looked over the employment agreements, the assignment agreements, and you've made sure that all things are signed and that's all taken care of. Also, keep in mind that universities and other joint research agreements that you might have entered into over the life of your business, you want to keep in mind that you may have entered into other agreements that have intellectual property clauses in them, and we recommend that you go look through your contracts and make sure that you evaluate your IP contracts and make sure that you actually own what you think you own, or you haven't told somebody else that you don't own it. Lastly, keep in mind that if you make a purchase of IP or a sale of IP, you need to look into whether what you're buying they actually own, and whether you're selling something. It's very important on you. It's on you to figure out, do I actually own what I'm selling? All right. Lastly, the messing up part of the patents. Public disclosures can be publications, papers, or online presentations. So like this presentation is technically public. There's video recordings of me that will go online somewhere. And if I came up here and I told you about my awesome idea, and I told you enough about it, and a patent examiner came and found that, they would be able to use that against you if it's been over a year. So say a year and a day from now, I file a patent application on the invention that I presented to you here today, and the patent examiner came and found it, they could use that against me. But if I filed a patent application yesterday, came and presented to you guys, then they couldn't use that against me, even though it was public. And so this is why it's very important to have those NDAs, even if practically business-wise, they might not be super helpful, intellectual property-wise, very helpful. Because by signing that NDA, and by making it clear that your conversations and your presentation to, say, a group of VCs or other inventors was confidential, the patent office can then not say that that was a public disclosure and use it against you. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So our recommendation is you file a patent application before the public disclosure occurs. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is you do so within that 1-year grace period. Lastly, and we kind of mentioned this earlier, even if you get it in, if you get the patent application in within the grace period year, other offices have different timelines. They might not even have a grace period, or if they do, that grace period may be like 4 months. And so if you filed it earlier than that or later than that, you might run into problems at other offices. Okay, that was a lot. We kind of flew through that, but I want to leave time for questions. Do you guys have any questions generally about patents or inventions? Don't disclose your idea now. We're not. This is public space, but no. Okay. Great. Thank you guys.